Jason Pack.
And I'm Alex Hall, and this is Disorder, the podcast for today's mad world.
Oh, Alex. But what if there is no order to be found in our mad world? Or what if the only order on offer is letting the wolves tend to the sheep? I mean, RFK Jr. at Health and Human Services? They might as well just let ExxonMobil run the EPA, and I have a great idea. Appoint the board of Thames Water to take over the Water Purity Regulatory Commission.
I mean, my emotions the last days have ranged from numbness and denial to anger, which I confess a lot of anger was directed at Biden because I blamed him for letting Trump get reelected. But that's a little unfair because at the end of the day, it wasn't the Democrats who nominated someone like Trump to be their candidate. And it is Trump who's now making these ludicrous appointments.
It is fair.
Well, it's fair, but at the end of the day, one could also spend forever berating ourselves. But I just wanted to say that when the nominations of Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard to be the head of the intelligence community, I started sinking into deep despair. And then I've ended up in a kind of sort of wild, manic hilarity, like the lunatics are taking over the asylum, right?
That is true. That's a great way of putting it. I mean, as grotesque as these appointments are, they're quite predictable. And we're going to get into that, dear mega orderers. But I'm going to jump back to this question of responsibility. You know, we had a postmortem with the two Matts last week. Alex and I did a postmortem in a way the week before. And immediately after this happened, you know, the postmortems on the internet, who to blame, who to shame, it's all been going on. But still, I am not happy that more people are not falling on their swords and doing mea culpas and all of that. That's not what this episode is about. But I just want to say that your blame for Biden and my blame for Harris and Biden's advisors and the people who didn't pull Biden earlier and all of that, that's not going away. Because in a way, you can't blame a fascist for being a fascist more than you can blame a carnivorous wolf for eating sheep. It's a carnivorous wolf. It eats sheep. You blame the shepherd for letting the wolf near the sheep.
Oh, that's such a good analogy. Thank you. I've been having awful arguments with friends of mine who have been berating me for my quite public criticisms of Biden in my Byline Times articles. But I think that is a great analogy. And it's an absolute tragedy and an outrage that Biden's legacy is going to be a second term of Trump.
Everything that he tried to prevent from happening has now happened worse. But we digress, Alex. The absurdity and ridiculosity of the Trump appointments is not something that catches us off guard, but I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding of it in the press. So I'll toss it to you first. How would you do the exegesis, the meaning of these appointments?
He is making appointments of people who are deliberate disruptors. And it is because this team thinks they have won a mandate for change. That is what voters asked for, that they were unhappy with the status quo. They think Washington needs shaking up. They think the Department of Defense needs shaking up. They think the bureaucracy needs shaking up. And so it is a deliberate policy of disruption. But it is just like the vote with Brexit in 2016. People felt unhappy and they were looking for someone to blame, and the EU was their target for blame. Brexit was not the solution to the UK's actual problems. Brexit became a symptom of the UK's problems and has made everything worse. And by the same token, voters voted for change, but the kind of change they are going to get is not actually going to address the problems they're really concerned about. That's the problem.
Yes, I think that's going on. I think that there's something else here, which is that the more compromised the individuals that are appointed are, the more they're beholden to Trump. So if you're completely unqualified, like Pete Hegseth at Defense Secretary, then they're entirely beholden to Trump, and that they're in what I would call like a codependent relationship of neopopulism. And that's a feature. In other words, Trump didn't pick Pete Hegseth because he's like very handsome but happens to be underqualified. He picked him because, you know what's great? He doesn't know anything about any of the issues, and he's brilliantly underqualified.
God, I mean, just listening to us having this conversation is so surreal. I don't get the appointment of Tulsi Gabbard at all. I mean, she is a completely inconsistent politician. I don't see what she brings by way of advantage to the Trump team. My kind of suspicion is that this may have been a Putin appointment, that if there is truth to the wide concern that Putin does actually have something on this administration, or he has something on Elon Musk, or he has something on Trump, maybe Gabbard is the sort of appointment there, because I cannot see any logic to her appointment whatsoever. And he's actually appointed not too bad people to be head of some of the actual specific intelligence agencies. So she's been given this post of DNI, but maybe there's going to be a channel that bypasses her completely, because one of the other issues that all these appointments arise is, how do officials work for a director of national intelligence who you think is actually an intelligence risk? How do you brief Elon Musk, who puts everything out on Twitter but has his own security clearance? How do you work for an attorney general who is determined to overrule the rule of law, to protect cronies, protect Trump, and go after perceived enemies of the state? I mean, this is a real challenge for public servants.
Again, I think that's a feature, not a bug, from Trump's perspective. She's so compromised that she just breaks the apparatus down. In other words, all the professionals won't want to give their real intelligence to her. And then it's not only that it flags to Putin and others that our intelligence agencies won't work, it makes it very difficult for the British and Canadians and Australians to work through Five Eyes properly. And it just breaks down the institutions. In the first term, he tried this, like Rex Tillerson said, I'm going to cut 20% of the people that stayed and I'm going to break up the bureaus. But now he may even just try to make the whole thing not work, the very disordering nature. And these appointments are proof of what I've always said, which is that it's a feature that it doesn't work. It's meant to disorder and not accomplish anything. And if Musk fights with Vivek Ramaswamy and then those guys both fight with Marco Rubio because he's more of a centrist, all the merrier.
So, Jason, you are actually helping me reframe the way I'm thinking about this. You're right. These are features, not bugs. These aren't by accident, these appointments. I mean, I've been having a conversation with some Republican friends of mine who've, I think, incredibly naively expressed surprise at these appointments, because this isn't what voters voted for. But yeah, this is what Trump was promising. I'm not surprised by these appointments. I mean, I have to confess, some of them are worse than I expected. I mean, I really didn't think he would actually go there with Robert F. Kennedy, who is just such a whack job.
Alex, RFK is a whack job, but that's a bug, not a feature. And the way we can unpack all these appointments is looking at the Matt Gaetz for Attorney General appointment, which was then withdrawn. Matt Gaetz has established himself since 2016 as a diehard Trump loyalist. Yes, he has rape and statutory rape charges against him. Yes, he tried to disturb the impeachment hearings in 2019 over the Zelensky phone call and to break congressional protocol. But again, that was a feature, not a bug, for Gaetz. Even though the Gaetz appointment has been withdrawn and in some way created some scandal, that's what Trump wanted. Trump chose Gaetz because Gaetz established that he's a loyalist. He will defend working with Russia if Trump wants to work with Russia. He will defend Trump in his legal cases and in asking for more votes in Georgia. Matt Gaetz for Attorney General shows that Trump is going to appoint people who are themselves in criminal jeopardy so that they need Trump in this Netanyahu needs to be in office so he won't be prosecuted kind of way. And then they have complete codependency. That the Gaetz appointment got withdrawn because Gaetz concluded that he had pissed off so many Republicans over the confirmation of the House Speaker issue, when he went against McCarthy and then he tried to upstage the whole process, even though he's a very junior congressman. Even though Gaetz had to withdraw because he wasn't going to be able to get confirmed, it accomplished what Trump wanted. He said, fuck you, establishment. Now that you, the Republican establishment, hitched your wagon to me, you are all my pawns and peons. And if I want to shove down your throat only convicted rapists for cabinet positions, you're going to have to take it. And even if they wouldn't take Matt Gaetz, and he's now appointed this woman, Pam Bondi, who's also from Florida, and she also doesn't have the requisite experience, and she's also a Trump loyalist, he's showing that he's going to push and push and push and push until people in his own party are willing to check him. But because Mitch McConnell wasn't willing to check him over major things, he'll just keep pushing. So maybe he couldn't get Matt Gaetz through. But he signaled his intentions. And now by getting Gaetz to withdraw, it seems like they're not going to fight the rest of the fights. They're going to accept Pete Hegseth. They may have to accept RFK Jr. When a normal Republican Party would say, we know that it's important to have fluoride in the water. We can't accept having RFK Jr. at Health and Human Services.
Wow. Well, the other thing about RFK is he's not trying to outshine Trump, whereas going back to this issue with Elon Musk, I think there is quite a risk of a falling out there. And I want to share with our viewers, going back to our earlier comment about feeling like we're living in a completely surreal world where the lunatics have taken over the asylum. I want to introduce viewers to a new person who is going to appear quite regularly on our show. She is my kind of alter ego. My name, as you know, is Alex Hall, and her name is a very weird backwards version of my name, Xela Llah Llah, and she lives in La La Land. She is a Trump supporter. She is a huge fan. She and I disagree on so many issues. It is like looking through the looking glass at her. But I have to acknowledge that chatting to her has helped me understand how the world looks if you are a Trump voter. And so she will be making the occasional appearance on this show to help us understand, why did she vote for Trump? What are they expecting from this administration? Xela is not a racist or a bigot. She voted for Trump because of the economy, and she's already saving money because she no longer tips people as much, because Trump has promised to remove taxes on tips. And Xela Llah Llah is thrilled with that. And she also doesn't understand why all these intellectuals are so opposed to Robert F. Kennedy as the Department of Health supervisor, because as a result of his medical policies, the population is going to go down, and that's good for the environment. That's great for the environment if there are less people on the planet, and stupid people who don't get vaccines will die. So this is great. We should be embracing that. So that's the world of Xela Llah Llah in La La Land.
I love it.
Sometimes the alter ego Xela Llah Llah is going to appear on this show too.
Oh, I like it. Well, we need to understand Trump voters, and we need to empathize with them. And more importantly than that, we need to acknowledge to ourselves that we've stepped through the looking glass, and we truly do live in a Xela Llah Llah mirror image crazy world. For example, why is it that the prosecutions over rigging the election in Georgia and asking for, won't you just find me 11,700 votes, and then goading the January 6th insurgents to take over the Capitol, didn't get Trump in jail? Where do the cases with Jack Smith sit right now, Alex? And how is it that in the real world these things didn't culminate?
It is just such a massive story of incompetence and own goals. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will have followed some of these, but the case in Georgia, for example, where they were seeking 11,000 plus extra votes, that case failed because the woman bringing the case turned out to be having an affair with one of the jurors or the judges on the case. So that one fell by the wayside. The Jack Smith cases, I think it was a case of overreach. The cases were filed too late, and some of the charges brought against Trump were stretching the limits. And I think they didn't convince people. They were just too late and they got bogged down in challenges. And then the most egregious case was the one in the Washington court system about Trump disrupting the elections and trying to overturn the certification of results. And they put forward a very good case. And that's the one that went to the Supreme Court, which now has a built-in Trump majority. And that was the one that led to the infamous ruling by the Supreme Court saying any president has executive immunity if they can say their acts were part of their role as president. And they managed to delay that case. It's gone back to the Washington court that is now trying to come up with new evidence to make the case, well, this wasn't a form of executive action. But as a result of Trump winning the election, all these cases are being put on hold now. So, for example, Trump was due to be sentenced for the crimes for which he was found guilty in the summer, the 34 counts of financial misconduct. He was due to be sentenced for those on November the 26th, and that sentencing has now been postponed. And basically everything is now on hold, and there are threats that Jack Smith will personally now be investigated by the Department of Justice for judicial misconduct. And so the whole strategy has backfired. It's been incompetence and complacency.
Yes, it's quite similar to what happened with the Russia hacking in 2016. Obama didn't want to call it out so as not to spook the horses and make people afraid to not trust the election results, because what does it matter? Hillary was going to win anyway. The reason that Merrick Garland and others didn't push the Trump cases so quickly in 2020 is they wanted to be seen as unifying figures. They weren't just coming in on a campaign of retribution and revenge, and therefore blah, blah, blah. But the irony is that neopopulism is all about revenge, and if you're Scaramucci or General Milley or McMaster, you have to buy your place in North London. And they're all going to be with me here, Alex, burrowing under the hills of Hampstead, because the reality is that revenge is a policy now. And the whole situation with the legal cases has gone full Netanyahu, which is that once you're in the prime minister or presidency office, you can't be tried for any of these things. And Trump is never going to face justice. There's never going to be a Nuremberg trial for January 6th and the other Trumpian misconducts for which I think that people should, have been in life imprisonment for this, and that the Steve Bannons and others of the world really should have been behind bars forever. It's very worrying to me what this says for our judicial system, because as you said, Trump is going to take aim at everyone involved in these cases.
But if you are in Xela Llah Llah world, you would argue that the justice system has indeed become very politicized. The Trump team successfully made the case that the justice system has been politicized and that there has been lawfare against him. And he's also been able to make the case that the way the justice system handled the cases against Hunter Biden was an example of politicized justice. And Xela Llah Llah was telling me last week, look, see how they tried to soften the charges against Hunter Biden. As it happens, one of the IRS officials who testified that the allegations against Hunter Biden had been toned down, he's a father on my baseball team. And he and his wife are good friends of mine, and they got threats and harassment and had to go into hiding themselves for calling out that the Justice Administration appeared to be levelling slightly softer charges against Hunter Biden than were actually merited. So these threats appear to be going both ways. These are good people who thought they were doing their job. So if you are Xela Llah Llah, the examples of politicization are quite real.
Yeah, there's a lot of politicization going around, but this issue of Supreme Court capture and lower court captures is quite relevant right now. To just pivot to the Supreme Court, should Sonia Sotomayor step down now before the Trump term?
So I am so suspicious of our current system. I remember how Mitch McConnell was able to delay the appointment of Merrick Garland, who was Obama's last appointee, and he had 10 months to get that appointment through and was not able to do so. So even though the Senate still just has a Democrat majority because the new House doesn't come in until the new year, I worry that Sonia Sotomayor stepping down, I'm not actually sure they'd be able to get that appointment through.
We should have packed the court immediately. I mean, as soon as Biden won, before we had the issue of the House being under Speaker Johnson's control, we had the House, the Senate, and there was an ability to potentially pack the court, as had happened in the early and mid-20th century. I was quite surprised that Biden didn't take off the gloves. It gets to this failure, which is that in trying to defend our institutions, our side has always been like, oh, we need to play not just by the letter of the law, but beyond the letter of the law with all this civility and all this delicacy. When the forces of evil are bending the institutions to their will, they're using pressure, they're sometimes using corruption and bribery. And if we go to a 7-2 court as a result of screwing this up, we're going to be in real, real trouble.
Oh my God. I mean, absolutely lambs to the slaughter. I am absolutely livid with Biden, his sort of pathetic, oh, welcome, congratulations, Mr. Trump, welcome back to the presidency. It's, we're going to work with you. This is not that kind of moment. It's like, come in, Mr. Hitler, welcome to the White House. I mean, I know he has to respect the results of the election. There was not electoral fraud. Trump won this up and down across the country. There is no doubt about that. But what Biden should be doing in these last few months is trying to put up as many guardrails around as many institutions as he can and saying to the American people, look, I respect the result. It's clear. A majority voted for Donald Trump. He won the popular vote. He won the electoral college vote. And Republicans are now going to be in office. I just want you to understand, however, that this man is a disruptor. The policies he is going to be setting out for this country are not what this country needs. They are not consistent with the values of our founders. And you all need to be thinking about that as you observe how this rolls out. Giving an actual strong message, not just, and we respect the turnover of power. And unlike those nasty Republicans, this is going to be peaceful. I mean, it is naive beyond belief how this is being handled. And now the Biden administration is finally going to allow long-term range weapons for Ukraine. Okay, hooray, half a cheer, half a clap, too little, too late. And by the way, let's announce this information so that the Russians have a little time to prepare for it. I mean, why not just let Ukraine do what they always should have been allowed to do? And this is so little, so late. It just makes my blood boil. And then on the Middle East, I'm really on a rant here. This is the Alex Hall that people used to like on Twitter, but I'm on a serious rant here. I can't forgive Biden for how he's handled this Gaza issue. You look at pictures of Gaza, it is a post-apocalypse world. It is a scene of devastation that is beyond most people's ability to fathom. His own administration sent a letter to the Israeli government saying, if you don't change your policies on humanitarian aid and allow more aid in within the next 30 days, we are going to have to apply some sanctions. The deadline passed last week, and the Biden administration announced that they still didn't feel there was enough cause for concern, even as UN agencies, Refugees International, all the aid agencies on the ground say less aid is getting in now than ever before, and Gaza is on the brink of famine. And still the Biden administration is, we are going to continue sending weapons to Israel. I am so angry about this. It is pathetic. It is immorally wrong. It is a failure of leadership. It is a failure of strategy. And when they talk about the Trump administration being cruel to migrants and being cruel to the Ukrainians, I want people to understand that millions of people have been displaced, are facing famine, have lost their lives and livelihoods as a result of this administration's policy.
I'm sorry,
Rant
Alex.
Over.
Yeah, I don't agree with this rant fully.
I am so angry with Biden.
I am angry at Biden, and this issue shows his inability to lead, just like in many other issues. He could have pressured Netanyahu to do things differently. He could have gone to the Knesset and tried to get Likud MPs to resign. However, I don't think that withdrawing weapons or not would have changed the Israeli prosecution of the war and the number of Palestinians that would or would not have been displaced. I just want to toss that out there. The humanitarian conditions in Gaza are what they are, but calling on that 30-day threat, the problem is just if you issue an ultimatum, you then have to follow through. Or we're faced with the Obama red line over Syria BS. So it's a diplomatic failure. But it's not like he can force the Israelis to let the aid in. In other words, I don't want to get into this issue, which I find particularly among my British friends, is that people say this is Biden's war. Well, it's fine that Trump won because Biden is busy starving these children in Gaza, and Biden blew up the buildings in Gaza. I get the rant, but I have just a little bit of a nuance here. Biden didn't blow up the buildings in Gaza. Biden isn't blocking the aid from going into Gaza. It's not Biden's bloody war. That's a mindfuck that the left and the right have conspired to agree on. What they should have done is use different ways to leverage Netanyahu because we have power. We, America, have power in this relationship, but not by blocking a few arms shipments. That would not have done anything.
This is a podcast where we can
agree to
disagree agreeably. And it's a tragedy that we have to keep coming back to this subject. Since you and I began the podcast, this has ended up being a running theme. And I think it's a sign of the enduring disorder in the world that there are such passions and disagreements, and it's infecting our politics and it's infecting our personal relationships. I was chatting to a friend last week who's had to cut off all connections with her sister because they disagree so fundamentally about Donald Trump. So these are very acute issues, and we should allow these passions to be expressed. I feel perhaps Netanyahu would always have tried to prosecute the war in the way that he did. Perhaps Biden thought he could have some leverage and influence through the supply of US arms and putting pressure and hugging Netanyahu close. But he hasn't had leverage, and it continues to be US-supplied weapons that are enabling Netanyahu to continue the war in this way. So I do hold Biden accountable. Also, irrespective of the 30-day ultimatum, there is a law on the US statute books that says the US has to cut off assistance to countries that block US humanitarian aid.
Of course, we all know this law. We all know that law, Alex, and it's been bandied about a million ways to Sunday. Do you know what I mean? We've heard these arguments for the last 6 months a million times. I just push back on the idea that this is Biden's war and Biden is responsible for the aid not going through. That's where we disagree, right? I would argue that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu are responsible. And now Israel Katz, now that he is the defense minister, and Golant, who was like a moderating influencer, to some extent independent, has been sacked, right? It's a question of relative blame. And when the history is written here, I believe that what Biden will be blamed for is something slightly different than what you're blaming him for, which is that he will be blamed for being ineffectual in trying to pressure Netanyahu and try to balance both sides. He won't be blamed for quote unquote genociding the children of Gaza, which is what I hear a lot of, or, starving them. Biden has starved the children of Gaza. I think people will say this now, but when the history of this is written in a neutral way in 100 years, they won't say that. What I think they will say is he was just one of these ineffectual liberals who thought, I can try to have both sides and try to protect the Israelis in this way, but have the Palestinians get more humanitarian aid and try to moderate this and that. And the diplomacy was just completely flat. They didn't even use the good offices of the Qataris effectively. They could have gotten the hostages and stopped the war with better diplomacy. That said, I don't believe that being an incompetent means that he genocided the children and stopped them from having the food. And I'm not the biggest Biden supporter here, but what I am is anti-conspiratorial. And this is going to be my hobby horse for these next 4 years, because I hate to be right. And I've felt that the meaning of a lot of what the neo-populists say is that it isn't about the given policies. It's about making sure that we have some ludicrous conspiracy theory that obscures what the real issues are. And the idea that Biden starves the children, and Bill Gates this and whatever. I think that this is going to be one of the rallying cries that allows the neo-populist insane people to justify whatever policy they want to do, even if it has much more humanitarian damage. But to sum this one up, they just didn't do any out-of-the-box thinking, and this has allowed a whole range of actors to run roughshod over them. Maybe we don't actually disagree. We just express it with a little bit different degree of nuance.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the verdict on the Biden administration is not that they acted with deliberately malign intentions, but that they were ineffectual. And that is one of the reasons why, again, Trump won. In Xela Llah Llah land, they wanted somebody who they thought was going to be more robust. And Xela Llah Llah and her friends told me on more than one occasion that they felt that the US had lost authority and respect in the world. And so, but let's move on from Xela Llah Llah.
Xela is not wrong. Xela has certain insights. I just wonder, Alex, are there things that I should know? Like, does Xela Llah Llah speak to you in your sleep?
Well, I'm afraid sometimes. So Xela Llah Llah has an account on Blue Sky, and so do I. And sometimes I forget, get confused, which person is speaking because she is so much my alter ego. It's like I'm looking into the mirror.
What does Xela say about COP? Is COP just a conspiracy on behalf of the woke minions who want to sell lithium batteries, or is the COP somehow something that Xela accepts?
So Xela's perspective is that Trump was right. The rest of the world is taking us for suckers and losers. And climate change restrictions are going to hit the US economy very hard. And what about those people in China and India? The big polluters aren't pulling their weight. And also, a lot of jobs in Xela's neighborhood depend upon resurrecting the coal economy and fracking. And these are all good things. And that the US can be energy independent. That will help our economy. That will also put pressure on Russia, one of the things that the so-called Democrats believe in. And so we should be tough. We should be energy independent. We should take advantage of the fact we have a great fracking industry. It will create jobs. That's Xela's take on climate change. And by the way, Xela and her friends are hunters. We like nature.
Wow.
Xela needs to come on this show quite often, I believe.
I know. I wonder what Xela's accent will be. Does she have like a posh plus Birmingham accent? Or does she combine some Midwestern plus Australian vibes?
So Xela is not very articulate. She prefers to post in short messages, largely on Twitter, and using a lot of exclamation marks and capitals.
And fortunately, the listeners will be saved from my alter ego, No Sag Cap. He's a fascinating and harebrained individual who conducts random, bizarre experiments, and he loves his Bitcoin. He has voted for Trump purely to add value to his Bitcoin portfolio. But No Sag also believes that government is inefficient, and for economic reasons, we need to have pure libertarianism. We're not going to have any No Sag in this episode because he frankly frightens me. After the break, we will talk about Starmer and the role of the UK. Do you remember when Macron first got into office and He posed for all these pictures like with GQ and in Newsweek and with Time and all of that. And, he's handsome and he was just like presenting a new vibe, like that he's going to work with Merkel in this way and whatever. I was thinking, and maybe this is because I'm naive, Starmer is not a bad looking guy. They're going to use as soon as they get into 10 Downing Street to like go on a media offensive, and he's going to drum up things about the UK as a world leader on climate and whatever. It barely gets even into the British newspapers, let alone the American newspapers. Why can't he use his kind of vibe and energy and reasonably decent looks to be something of frisson in the media?
I don't think Starmer generates frissons of excitement. I don't think he's that kind of personality. He is a conscientious, thoughtful lawyer, and he's taken over a country that is in quite some difficulty economically, politically, socially, culturally. He's got a lot of problems on his plate back home. His first 100 days haven't gone that great. Even the slightest thing gets picked up and magnified by some of the horrid press out to trip him up in every way. It's quite interesting to me to see Liz Truss still getting space here in the US mediascape. There was an op-ed by her in the Wall Street Journal last week. I don't see Starmer placing articles or his team popping up for interviews in the US space. And I think they're very focused on their domestic agenda. They're navigating the ideological incoherence of still trying to defend Brexit while saying they want a strategy for growth, but cutting off one of the avenues that might allow that, which is improving trade with the EU. They're still willfully distorting the arguments. And so now Starmer has this additional headache of Trump being elected. And already Trump officials are giving interviews to the media saying, we want to offer the UK a trade deal and the UK needs to throw in its lot with us and abandon that socialist failing EU. And it is a deliberate attempt to drive a wedge further between the UK and the EU. And I have absolutely no doubt that Tory politicians and people like Truss and Cummings and Farage will be egging the Trump administration and his advisors in doing that in order to put Starmer on the spot and to make it ever harder for the UK to go back to the EU. And the UK, for decades, we had this wonderful situation where we had our fantastic economic and trade and political relationship with the EU, and we had a fantastic security and intelligence and political relationship with the US, and we didn't need to choose. And now there's a risk we have to choose. And we are like, we risk these two continents drifting further apart. And we're trying to ride both horses with influence in neither. And we're going to land with a splash in the mid-Atlantic. And this is very difficult. So the idea that Starmer is also going to be this figure on the world stage, saving our multilateral world order, he's got enough trying to figure out, how does the UK position itself? How does it navigate Trump? How do we rebuild relations with the EU? And how do we sort out the UK? That's a heck of a big agenda.
Yes, but we shouldn't let Starmer off lightly here. There were opportunities for him to have cut a bigger figure in those 100 days and to have been bolder. He seems to be falling into the Biden-Harris trap of being such an institutionalist and such a manager as to not articulate a vision. I probably should have seen that coming. And when I said I had a man crush on Starmer, I have to say that sometimes, like any crush, these crushes fade. I think that Starmer is doing the centrist ordering, but he can't be a mega orderer because that's too bold. Just like the two Matts said last week, Starmer is not a bold communicator the way that Blair was. So even if he might be a Blairite in some of his policy solutions, he's not a Blairite in the scope of his vision. But like the two Matts said last week, this is an opportunity for Starmer to say, the referendum happened and we're not going back in the EU, but the wolf is at the gates. Putin is on one side and Trump is on the other. And it's not just youth mobility that we need with the EU. We need more things. And we're going to be doing this and this and this and this, and that it's an actual requirement. I just don't see him as having the courage to do it.
No, it would require a U-turn. really, in acknowledging that Brexit has created complications and is an albatross, and also that restoring relations with the EU is not going to be straightforward. I mean, it requires dropping the blinkers on a subject that has been so neuralgic and where still a lot of the UK population, even if they're disenchanted with Brexit, they don't particularly want to reopen that scab. So it's going to take a courage of leadership, and I'm not sure he's got that right now.
He doesn't. So then where does this leave the future of the multilateral world order in general, Alex? You've done the diplomacy. You've worked on these topics. It looks pretty bloody grim from the way I'm looking at things. If Starmer can't be a voice for the West and for ordering, and the UN is completely compromised, where does this leave us?
Well, I'm still sort of working my way through, so I don't want to sort of throw out half-baked analyses. But what I can see instinctively happening is what we're already seeing, which is people moving into blocks. The UN isn't going to disband, but it's already not been that relevant for quite a long time, and it's going to continue to be that way. I don't see the UN Security Council achieving much. I mean, the UN Human Rights Council might meet, UNESCO might meet. They'll continue doing their thing, but it's not going to influence real-world actions. The humanitarian agencies will continue to be a very necessary body, but the US might cut funding to the UN humanitarian agencies very badly. And then I think countries are going to move into blocks. And I think some countries are going to decide they're going to try and hug Trump close and suck up to him. There'll be Argentina, possibly Japan and Korea, Hungary. There'll be countries that will try and get close to Trump. There will be countries in the EU that try to preserve the sort of the core ethics and values of the EU. There will be those saying this proves the EU needs to get its act together on defence, which undeniably it does, and on strategic autonomy. There will be BRICS players. Countries will be positioning themselves. They will be looking to decide, how do we keep our head down and who do we try and align with, and what's going to happen over the next 4 years. It's going to be a kind of fragmented world. And countries that are very weak are going to be hedging their bets between China and the US.
Alex, sounds like a lot of disorder, but that is more than enough from you.
Yeah. So will Xela be allowed to come back more often? Xela's quite excited.
You know, I'd actually like to meet her. She sounds kind of upbeat, a little bit chipper. She goes hunting with her husband. Explain it more to me.
Okay, so they go hunting. They make moonshine. They live in a very nice trailer in West Virginia, and they go to their church regularly. They homeschool their kids, and they are suspicious of everybody in Washington. They are suspicious of the establishment. They're also very disillusioned with the military. They're real patriots, and they had their son sign up for the Marines and served. So they see themselves as very patriotic. They stand up when the anthem is played and they care about veterans, but they got very disillusioned after Afghanistan and Iraq. That's where they are. They're not bad people. They're not bad people.
And if Alex Hall is a Ravens fan, is Xela Llah Llah a Commanders fan?
No, Xela Llah Llah supports their local high school football team.
Only. Interesting.
Called the Hornets.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So that's more than enough from me, but please rejoin us in 2 days. Alex and Xela and I are going to answer some listener questions. And we got, since the election, we've gotten a ton of questions. So we have a spontaneous listener question bonus episode on Thursday. Wow.
Great, Jason. Always great to chat with you. It's bye from Alex. It's bye from Xela. Both of us thank George McDonough and Neil Fern, our producers, and we hope you will keep following us. Disorder beckons.